The church bells were ringing for a wedding that would tear apart everything Jake Carson had sworn to guard. He sat his horse on the ridge above Copper Ridge, watching thin smoke curl from chimneys below, knowing that in 8 hours Eleanor would walk down the aisle to marry the devil of this town. Jake's cracked hands tightened on the reins as Thomas Mitchell's last words replayed in his head. 3 months earlier, the old soldier had grabbed Jake's shirt with bloody fingers and whispered, "Promise me, Jake. Promise you'll look after my Eleanor when I'm gone." Jake had given that promise without a second thought. He'd fought beside Thomas in the war and watched him pull men out of hell at Gettysburg. A hero like that deserved a promise kept. But staring down at Copper Ridge now, Jake feared he'd promised what no man could deliver. The town belonged to Silas Blackwood. The banker owned the mine, the store, the saloon, and half the roofs on Main Street. When Thomas died owing $3,000, Blackwood gave Eleanor a cruel choice: marry him, or watch her family lose everything. Her 15-year-old brother, Danny, would be sent underground until his lungs failed, just like their father. Jake pressed his spurs and rolled down the main road, dust trailing his horse. The wooden buildings seemed smaller than he remembered, worn and tired. Men in stained work coats lifted their eyes on the saloon porch, watching him like folks who'd learned not to trust anyone at all. He tied off at the boarding house where Eleanor stitched dresses. Through the window, he saw her bent over a white gown, dark hair shining in the morning light. He could read the sadness in the slope of her shoulders, the way she held herself, like someone carrying a boulder she couldn't set down. Jake knocked, heart pounding. When she opened the door, her green eyes went wide with shock and something close to hope. "Jake Carson," she breathed. "Why are you here?" "I made your father a promise," he said. "I'm here to keep it." Her face trembled, and for a moment she looked like the scared girl he'd left when he marched off to war. Then her back straightened and the woman she'd become stood tall. "You're too late, Jake. The wedding's at 6. There's nothing you can do." "There's always something," he said. "Pack a bag. We leave now." She shook her head, tears brightening her eyes. "You don't understand. If I don't marry Silas, he'll destroy Danny. He's got proof my brother stole from a mine payroll. Real proof, Jake. They'll hang him." Cold washed through Jake. Blackwood wasn't just stealing Eleanor's freedom. He was holding her brother's life to force her hand. The banker had tied every knot and sealed every door. But Jake had lasted 3 years of war by being harder than the men trying to kill him. He would have to be that man again. "Then we make sure he never gets to use that proof," Jake said quietly. "Tell me everything about Silas Blackwood." Eleanor glanced down the hall, then stepped outside and closed the door. "Jake, you don't know what he is. He owns the sheriff. He owns every man who matters." Her voice fell to a whisper. "And if he learns you're here to stop this wedding, he'll kill you." Jake touched the revolver at his hip, feeling its familiar weight. "Let him try." She gripped his arm, fingers digging in. "There's more. And it's about you. Silas knows what happened in Mexico. The gold. Why you really left the army." The words hit Jake like a hammer. His past had found him in this dust-bitten place. Blackwood didn't only own Copper Ridge. He owned Jake's secrets. And in 6 hours Eleanor would be Silas's wife unless Jake found a way to break a man who held all the cards. The church bell chimed 11. 7 hours left. Jake looked into Eleanor's frightened eyes and saw his own fear there, but underneath it was something else. The same stubborn hope that kept him alive through cannon fire. Maybe good men could still win against long odds. "Eleanor," he said softly, "how well do you know the inside of Blackwood's house?" Her face lost color. She checked the street, then pulled Jake into the narrow alley beside the boarding house. "Swear you won't do anything foolish. Silas has guards who'd shoot you for standing on his steps." But Jake's mind had already dropped into soldier mode, laying out positions and angles. How many men? Where are his papers? "No, Jake," she snapped, panic rough in her voice. "I know what you're thinking, and it won't work. He keeps everything in a safe in his study. Even if you get past his guards, you won't crack it." Jake studied her face and saw the part she hadn't said. "But you know the combination." Her silence was answer enough. A hard smile tugged at his mouth. He's already treating you like you belong to him, showing you his secrets. That's not trust, she said bitterly. It's ownership. He shows me because I can't change a thing. Because I'm trapped. She drew a shaky breath. The combination is Danny's birth date. Silas thinks it's romantic to use my family against me, even in numbers. Footsteps boomed at the mouth of the alley. A huge man in a black suit appeared, hand on his gun, with 2 more shadows behind him. Miss Mitchell, he rumbled. Mr. Blackwood wishes to see you. Now. Eleanor went white but lifted her chin with a courage that made Jake's chest tighten. Tell Mr. Blackwood I'll be along shortly, Marcus. Marcus's eyes slid to Jake. And you are? Jake stepped forward with open hands. Carson. Old friend of the family. Mr. Blackwood would like to meet you as well, Marcus said, smiling without warmth. He's very interested in old friends. The walk to Blackwood's bank felt like marching to a scaffold. Jake counted windows, doors, back exits. He knew this was exactly what Blackwood wanted, to pull him into the den and snap the trap shut. Copper Ridge Bank glittered with polished wood and brass. Silas Blackwood rose from behind a thick oak desk, a man in his 50s with silver hair and eyes like ice chips. His smile was the worst thing Jake had seen since the battlefield. Jake Carson, he said, hero of the Rio Grande. The man who lifted 10,000 in Confederate gold and vanished into the desert. He waved to a chair. Sit. We've much to discuss. Jake stayed on his feet, every muscle ready. I don't know what you think you know, Blackwood, but nothing. Blackwood cut in, smooth as oil. I know everything. The cave in Mexico. Lieutenant Morrison trying to report you. The accident on his way back. Such a pity for a man to fall off a cliff with a bullet in his back. Heat rose under Jake's skin. Morrison had tried to take the gold himself and drew first. Jake had fired to live. With Morrison dead and the gold gone, it looked like murder and theft. You see, Mr. Carson, Blackwood said, I'm making my business to know any man who might threaten my interests. And you are wanted. The Army still looks for you. A telegram to Fort Collins brings a patrol in 3 days. Eleanor gasped. Jake forced his heartbeat steady. Blackwood had him caged as tightly as he had Eleanor. But I'm reasonable, Blackwood continued. Ride out before sunset, and I'll forget we met. Stay and meddle with my wedding, and I'll see you hang. Jake looked at Eleanor and saw despair settle on her shoulders like a lead blanket. He had come to save her and walked straight into the web. The clock chimed noon. For hours until vows. For hours to pull off a miracle. I need time to think about your generous offer, Jake said. Blackwood nodded, tasting victory. Of course. Until 4 o'clock. Time enough to pack and run. After that, he shrugged. My patience ends. Jake turned, but Blackwood's voice clipped him at the door. And, Mr. Carson, if anything happens to me, I've left instructions with my lawyer in Denver. Your wanted notice will be nailed to every telegraph pole from here to Mexico inside a week. Outside, Eleanor clutched his arm. Jake, go. Please. Before he changes his mind. Jake's eyes swept the street. The sheriff's thin face in the office window, 3 of Blackwood's men lounging on the saloon porch, more at the hotel and the livery. Every doorway whispered the banker's reach. He owns this whole damn town, Jake muttered. That's what I've been saying, Eleanor whispered. No one will help. No one will stand against him. Please, just leave. At least then one of us will be free. He looked at her, strong, brave, beautiful even in fear, and heard Thomas's voice again. Eleanor, he asked, what time does the afternoon stage roll through? She blinked, confused. 2:30. Headed to Denver. But why? Jake's mind clicked like gears finding teeth. How many get off here? 3 or 4. Drummers. Sometimes a family. She gripped his sleeve. Jake, you're scaring me. What are you planning? Blackwood expects me to run, he said. Sometimes the best place to hide is out in the open. He glanced at the bank window where Blackwood's shape moved. I need you to do something dangerous. Anything, she said. At 2. Tell Blackwood you change your mind. Move the wedding to 4 instead of 6. That gives us less time, she protested. Exactly. He'll be busy rushing a ceremony and won't notice what's happening under his nose. Jake lowered his voice. When the stage arrives, I'll be on it, not as Jake Carson, but as someone else. A disguise, she whispered. Half this town knows your face. The other half doesn't. And Blackwood's so sure he's won, he won't expect me to walk in. The clock tower read 1:15. Trust me, Eleanor. Can you? Footsteps pounded. Danny Mitchell ran up, cheeks red, eyes wide. Eleanor, the mine, another cave-in. 3 men trapped. Cold pinched Jake's spine. Let me guess. One of them is Blackwood's man. Danny nodded, short of breath. Thomas Hardley, the foreman. If he dies, Silas says he'll shut the mine. Folks are panicking. Eleanor went pale. This isn't chance. Silas is tightening his grip. He wants the town scared. Jake's soldier mind saw something else, an opening. Danny, how long to dig men out? Hours, maybe days, depends how deep. Where is everyone? At the mine. Every able-bodied man is there. Danny's eyes widened as he understood. Jake, you're not thinking. I'm thinking Blackwood's house is emptier than it's been in years, Jake said. Change of plans. Forget the stage. Forget the early vows. We take those papers now, while half his guards are gone. It's still suicide, Eleanor whispered. Marcus stayed. 2 others, too. I'm not using the front door, Jake said. I know another way, Danny blurted, jaw set like his father's. There's a root cellar out back that connects to the basement. I used to sneak in before Silas bought it. No, Eleanor snapped. I won't let you risk your life. It's my life he's playing with, Danny answered. Those papers aren't about payroll theft. I saw Silas plant that gold in our shed, Ellie. He framed me to control you. The truth slammed into Jake. Blackwood hadn't found evidence. He'd built it. The banker had been setting the board for months, cutting off every escape until Eleanor had only one door, his. Then we go together, Jake said. Danny shows the way. I grab the papers. We blow Blackwood's lies wide open. What about me? Eleanor asked. Jake saw the iron in her, the courage that refused to bend. You do the hardest part. Keep Silas busy while we're inside. She nodded. How? Go to him. Ask to see the dress he bought. Tell him you want everything perfect. Keep him talking. No matter what you hear, don't look away. The clock struck 2. For hours until the wedding, if there was one. Jake looked at Eleanor and Danny and realized his mission had grown. He wasn't only trying to save a promise. He was trying to save a town from a man who burned anything in his path. If this goes wrong, he began. It won't, Eleanor said, fire lighting her eyes. Because I'm not marrying that man. Not today. Not ever. Danny grinned, looking so much like Thomas that Jake's chest ached. Then let's go steal the truth. None of them noticed the figure watching from the saloon window or the man slipping out the back and running toward the mine. Blackwood was about to learn the one flaw in his perfect plan. He'd misjudged how hard the Mitchells could fight. The root cellar smelled of damp dirt and old vegetables. Danny led Jake through the narrow passage, their steps quiet on the packed floor. Above them, Eleanor's voice floated from the parlor, too bright, too careful, as she spoke to Blackwood about flowers and music. The safe is up those stairs, Danny whispered, pointing to a wooden flight that rose into the house. 3rd door on the right. Jake checked his gun and listened to his instincts. Something felt off, too easy, too quiet, but they were in it now. He climbed, each board creaking like a drum. The study door was unlocked. Alarm knotted his gut. 15 years in tight spots had taught him to trust that feeling. But Eleanor's nervous laugh drifted from the front, and he knew she couldn't stall forever. The safe door stood open. Jake stepped close, bracing for a bullet in his back. Inside lay a single folder stamped with Danny's name. He grabbed it and turned, and froze. Marcus filled the doorway, gun drawn. Mr. Blackwood figured you'd come, he said, smiling sharp. He's waiting in the parlor, with your young friend from the cellar. Danny. They had him. Marcus motioned with the pistol. In the parlor, Blackwood lounged in his chair, satisfied as a cat with a cornered mouse. Danny knelt beside him, a second guard's gun pressed to the boy's head. Eleanor stood near the window, white as paper. "Mr. Carson," Blackwood purred. "Right on time. I do love punctual men." He nodded toward the folder. "Find what you wanted?" Jake looked from the papers to Danny's frightened face and back to Eleanor's eyes. He had walked straight into the snare every step predicted. "Let the boy go," Jake said. "This is between you and me." "You're wrong," Blackwood replied. "It's always been about family, loyalty, promises." His smile cut deeper. "Tell me, what did you promise Thomas Mitchell?" Jake's jaw tightened. Somehow Silas knew even that. "I promised to protect his children." "And how's that going?" Blackwood rose, smoothing his vest. "I've planned this day for months. Every problem, every angle, every trick you could try." He nodded to Marcus. "Kill the boy." "No," Eleanor cried. But Jake was already moving. He dove, firing as he rolled. His bullet drilled the guard beside Danny. The man's shot toward the ceiling as he fell, and Danny scrambled away. Marcus fired. Splinters burst from the chair where Jake had been. Jake rolled again and shot, but Marcus ducked behind the sofa. "Enough." Blackwood's shout snapped the room still. He stood behind Eleanor now, a small derringer at her temple. "Drop it, Mr. Carson, or I paint the wall with her brains." Jake froze, cold half raised. Eleanor's eyes found his, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Not fear, resolve. The same look he'd seen in soldiers who had decided what they were willing to give. "Jake," Eleanor said softly, "remember what my father told you about promises?" Thomas's voice echoed in Jake's mind. "Sometimes keeping your word means letting go of everything else." Eleanor slammed her elbow back into Blackwood's ribs and twisted. The derringer barked. The bullet went wide. Jake fired twice. Both rounds hit Blackwood in the chest. The banker stumbled, hands red on his white shirt, eyes wide. With shock. This isn't how." "No," Jake said, kneeling as the light faded from him. "It isn't." Marcus lunged from cover. Gun aimed at Jake's spine, but Danny was there first, swinging the fireplace poker and cracking Marcus across the skull. The big man dropped. Eleanor fell against Jake, arms around him, alive and shaking. For a heartbeat, nothing else existed. Then the sound of horses hammered in. Many riders. "The sheriff," Eleanor whispered. They heard the shots. Jake peered through the curtain. 6 badges, rifles ready, ringed the house. His wanted poster might as well have been stamped on his face. "Eleanor," he said, calm and low. She looked up and saw the truth in his eyes, and what he meant to do. "No, Jake. We can explain. The papers, what Silas did, they won't listen," he said gently. "You know that. But you and Danny are free now. That's what your father wanted." Jake Carson walked out the front door with his hands raised, the folder tucked inside his shirt. The sheriff arrested him for killing Silas Blackwood. Within a week, the Army put him on a train to face court-martial for Lieutenant Morrison's death. Eleanor sold the boarding house and started over in California with Danny. She never married, but she lived free and raised her brother into the kind of man their father would have honored. Sometimes letters found her, smuggled from the military prison where Jake served his time. He never complained. He never took back his choice. He'd kept his promise to Thomas Mitchell, and that was enough for him. On a warm evening in 1887, 10 years after that deadly day in Copper Ridge, Eleanor heard a knock at her Sacramento door. She opened it to find a man with gray in his hair and lines at the corners of his eyes, but the same steady gaze that once promised her father protection. "Hello, Eleanor," Jake said, voice quiet. Her smile rose slowly and true for the first time in a decade. But those 10 years had not simply passed. They had weighed on both of them in ways that did not show in words. Jake had carried iron bars, hard labor, and the heat of a guilt he didn't name. Eleanor had carried a town's ashes, the memory of a wedding dress that never saw an altar, and a brother who looked to her for both mother and father. Yet standing in that doorway, none of those burdens spoke first. What came forward was the promise that began it all, and the life made from keeping it. The day Jake was taken, Copper Ridge changed like a storm-bitten sky. The sheriff wrote his report, quick and clean. Men whispered that Blackwood had finally met a man who wouldn't bend. Women said Eleanor had stared down a monster and lived, though some blamed her for stirring trouble in a town that had learned to eat fear with breakfast. Danny, with the proof Jake had saved tucked into a Bible, faced the judge 2 weeks later. The forged charge crumbled in an hour. The truth of planted gold and bought deputies seeped out like water through dry boards. It did not wash everything clean. Men who owed Blackwood money still owed someone, but it loosened the grip enough for folks to breathe. The mine stayed open under a new foreman who spoke more with his hands than his fists. The saloon changed owners twice. The general store kept its ledger, but Martha behind the counter stopped flinching when certain boots crossed the threshold. Copper Ridge did not become a heaven. It simply stopped being hell. Eleanor used a boarding house sale to haul Danny west. In Sacramento, she stitched and saved, kept books for a mercantile 2 days a week, and taught Danny sums at the table by lamplight. He grew into a broad-shouldered man who could fix a wheel and write a letter without shame. On Sundays, they walked by the river. Sometimes Eleanor would pause at the water's edge and see a different river, the one that ran behind the bank in Copper Ridge, where a man with a silver vest had believed himself untouchable. When those memories tightened her chest, she would touch the edge of a folded letter and breathe through the ache until it loosened. Jake's notes never spoke of cells or guards. He wrote of sky, a square of blue at noon, and of sound, a train whistle at dawn. He wrote of the smell of coffee in a tin cup and of the way promises feel when you hold them up to the light and find they still shine. He asked after Danny's schooling and whether the new Singer machine stitched straight. He did not ask forgiveness. He did not offer excuses. He was a soldier even in chains. When the knock came in 1887, Danny was in the yard planing a board. Eleanor called his name, but didn't look away from the man at the door. Jake stood still, as if any sudden move might break the moment. "How long?" she asked. "A month," he said. They counted the years and called it paid. A captain I served under sent a letter. Said a man shouldn't spend the rest of his life paying twice for the same day. Eleanor stepped aside. He crossed into a room that smelled of lemon oil and clean cotton, a room with sunlight falling in squares on the floor. "You look like your father when you hold your mouth that way," Jake said softly. She almost laughed. "And you look like trouble walking." Danny came in wiping his hands, froze, then grinned like a boy. "Jake." They shook forearms like men who had shared a fire on a cold night. No one spoke about Copper Ridge first. They spoke about small things, the price of flour, the river rising in spring, the way Sacramento's streets filled with talk when the railroad paid out wages. Only after supper, when the light went soft and the dishes were stacked to dry, did they speak of the past. Jake told them what he could bear to say about the trial, that he did not name names and did not hand off blame, that a sergeant he'd once pulled from a ditch stood up in a courtroom and reminded officers what kind of man Jake was before a cave in Mexico changed the road under his feet. Eleanor told him how the town had slowly righted itself, how the sheriff learned to listen once his pay no longer came in envelopes tied with blue ribbon, how Marcus left town with a scar under his hair and never wrote back to anyone. "I don't pretend we fixed it," she said. "We just stopped it from swallowing us." Jake nodded. Sometimes that's all victory is. He reached into his coat and set a small packet on the table. "Danny, this belongs to you." Inside lay the last of the papers, copies of court filings that cleared his name, a signed note from a judge in Copper Ridge stating the charge had been false, and a photograph of a boy in a too-big coat standing beside a woman who looked like she'd carried the world and set it down. Danny swallowed hard. "I kept one thing of yours, too," he said, and brought out the folded page Jake had sent years ago with a line underlined twice. "I kept my promise." Eleanor looked at Jake, and he looked back, and what passed between them wasn't the start of a fairy tale or the end of a story. It was the steady knowledge that two people can live with the same pain and still choose hope. They walked out to the porch as the evening cooled. A breeze moved through the almond trees, and somewhere a dog barked at nothing. "Do you ever think of Copper Ridge?" Jake asked. "Only when I must," Eleanor replied. "And when I do, I choose which parts to carry." Jake smiled, tired and real. "Your father used to say you could drown in a river if you held every current at once." "Then we hold one," she said. "We hold the one where a man kept his word." Danny leaned on the rail, looking older and younger at the same time. "I still go over numbers like you taught me, Ellie. Every time I balance a ledger, I think about that safe and how quickly a lie can ruin a life. And how quickly the truth can save one," Jake said. They stood quiet for a while. The sky turned the color of peaches, then dimmed to a clean blue. When the first star showed, Jake cleared his throat. "I don't expect anything," he said. "Not a place in this house. Not forgiveness I haven't worked for. I came to say I was here, alive. And that if you ever need me, we'll send word," Eleanor said. "And if you don't need me," Jake added, "I'll still be around. I've got a job waiting at a freight yard. Honest work. I plan to keep my head down and my hands busy." Eleanor smiled. "You never were very good at keeping your head down." "No," he admitted. "But I'm learning." Danny nudged the door with his boot. "There's a loose board inside that's been squeaking for a week. Might be a job for a man who can handle trouble." Jake laughed, a quiet, rusty sound that made Eleanor's throat tighten. "That I can do." He stepped inside and knelt, listening, tapping, finding the nail that needed setting. It was a small thing, and also everything. The sound of a hammer, the feel of wood steadying under a sure hand, the way a house can grow more itself when someone cares for it. Letters still came and went after that night, but now they didn't have to be smuggled. Jake worked sunup to sundown and slept like the dead. On Sundays, he walked with Eleanor and Danny by the river. Sometimes he told stories about Thomas in the war, how he laughed too loud and prayed too soft, how he could turn fear into courage by saying a man's name as if that was enough to keep him standing. Sometimes Eleanor told stories of her mother's bread recipe or the way the boarding house creaked when it cooled at dusk. They did not speak of Blackwood often. When they did, it wasn't to sharpen old anger, but to keep the lesson from fading. Money can buy a town, but it cannot buy the ground under your word. Power can bend the law, but it cannot bend the truth forever. A promise kept can outlast a gallows and a prison, and the worst 10 years a life can carry. Jake did not ask to marry. Eleanor did not ask him to leave. They let days stack into weeks, and let weeks find their shape. Sometimes that is how broken things heal. Without speeches, without banners, just people getting up each morning and choosing to be decent. Years later, when Danny took over the mercantile books and hired a boy to sweep before school, folks in Sacramento knew him as the man who never cooked his numbers and never let a widow pay interest. When someone asked why he ran his ledgers that way, he would smile a little and say, "Because I remember what a lie can do." If they pressed, he'd nod toward a quiet man loading freight down by the rail yard and a woman who could sew a wedding dress that made even the hardest men stop and breathe. If you asked those two what saved them, they would tell you it wasn't guns or plans or even luck, though all of those had their place. They would tell you a promise kept as a kind of roof. Under it, people can stand when the storm comes. And when the bells ring, whether for a wedding that never was or for a Sunday that comes on time, you can hear more than iron and wind. You can hear the sound of a town learning to breathe again. That's what Jake heard the last time he rode through Copper Ridge years later, tipping his hat to a sheriff who had learned to do his job, to a saloon where the piano finally drowned out the whispers, and to a little grave with Thomas Mitchell's name on it. "I kept it," Jake said under his breath. "I kept it, old friend." Then he turned his horse toward the west and the life he had pieced back together, one small repair, one honest day, one quiet promise at a time.